Hello, leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love and Organizations, the podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host today. I'm joined by Rhie-young Lim, Chief Operations Officer at Live Canvas Technologies. Rhie co-founded Live Canvas at an MIT biotech startup that is transforming biological tissue processing and phenotyping to radically improve human health. Since the startup's incorporation 3 years ago, Rhie has successfully led fundraising and exclusive licensing efforts and has grown the company to a profitable venture. She now oversees day-to-day operations spanning marketing, sales, distribution, as well as talent management and long-term strategy and planning. Previously, Rhie brought the very first overseas MIT Entrepreneurship Bootcamp to Seoul, South Korea, and was a financial correspondent for CNBC Asia for 6 years. Rhie, I am so much looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
Rhie, I want to learn more about your personal story. From South Korea to the US, you've been on TV, on CNBC, and now you're leading a biotech with a very big purpose and ambition. Tell us a little bit more about your story.
Sure. I've had a very, I would say, an eclectic childhood. So my father was a diplomat. So ever since I was 3 years old, I had to move around and get used to my completely new environment. So the places I've lived as a child were Japan, India, Zimbabwe, and the U.S., as well as South Korea. So I can't really call myself one thing, but I feel like I'm like all of those nationalities. I've always kind of wanted to have a colorful life in the sense that, I've never been the kind of a person that just looks at the trees, but I like to just look at the woods, the overall, the picture and where we're headed. So I think that was my personality. And when I was younger, I would look at Christiana Amanpour. Not sure if you know this war zone reporter who was a big shot for CNN, and then she moved on to ABC. But she was like the war zone reporter, and I would watch her as a young child, right, in a hotel room as my father just relocated to Zimbabwe, or a very new environment for me, like in India. And I would just look at the lady on the screen who was in a war zone, but she was so brave, and there was wind blowing in her face and sand also, and that just kind of mesmerized me. So I wanted to be a storyteller like her. And a reporter that was situated in dangerous locations and situations. However, that never materialized, I suppose. So I went and worked for the exact opposite, kind of function or television station, which was CNBC, which is all about money and capitalism and, the stock market and how to make your gains, so on and so forth. But the boss there told me that, if you really want to change the world, you actually need to change the flow of the money. And that's what CNBC does. So I was like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting and it sounds pretty legit. So that's how I joined CNBC and worked there as a reporter, and CNBC Asia in Singapore, which is where the headquarters is based. They wanted to launch a new channel in Seoul, South Korea, which is where I happen to be from. So, they recruited me to be the Seoul correspondent. And from then onwards, I was doing stock market updates on Samsung and electronics and the major Fortune 500 Korean companies like Hyundai Motors, so on and so forth. And that was a prime time. I got an opportunity to interview Warren Buffett. In fact, he was my very first interview, and therefore, everything else, or my basically show from then onwards was like a smooth sail. Because if you have Warren Buffett on your show, then you really can't say no to this reporter. Super rookie. So, it was a fun time and also very dynamic and exciting. So I did about 6 to 7 years of that. And I met my now husband, who was the very first scientist slash engineer I ever dated, or in fact was, a friend to, because I come from like a very like finance, business, international relations kind of a background. So a totally different end of the world. And I guess, opposites attract, because he was also the very first like non-scientist he's ever dated. And so we hit it off, and then I had to relocate all the way to here, Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is like 7,000 miles away from my home. And
Yeah.
back then, I didn't have a work visa, right? So I just couldn't like find myself a job or anything. So I ended up actually translating Bill Allet, the director of Martin Entrepreneurship Center
Okay.
at MIT, all of his courses into Korean for free.
Oh,
So that's
wow.
how like hungry and gung ho and how desperate I was, so to speak. And then I managed to bring him to Seoul, South Korea, my alma mater. And then he gave like a day long seminar on his book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship, which in Korea is actually MIT Startup Bible. So
Oh,
he's considered
wow.
like God of entrepreneurship in Korea, and Korean folks just love MIT, right? So we had a huge turnout, a huge crowd, and I think he was also excited to see how like the Korean government was pumping in money to grow the entrepreneurship ecosystem there. So a few months later, I was able to bring him and his team back to Korea for a week, and then we did this like week long entrepreneurship boot camp, and had like 70 students from some of the most unexpected countries like Afghanistan and Syria too. So that was very rewarding. And then after that, I was kind of on a entrepreneurship high, and my husband, who's a very good persuader, he said to me, "Hey, Rhie, you're devising all these entrepreneurship curriculums for education and for aspiring entrepreneurs. However, you've never been an entrepreneur yourself. So, um, yeah, why don't we start a company and see how that goes?" So I was like, okay, that sounds good. And then at first I was like, maybe I'll learn how to actually incorporate a Delaware corporation, right? Do like a stock option agreement and see what that exactly means and looks like, and all these like very theoretical things into implementation. And that was kind of where I thought the excitement was, because all of those things I was talking about but never had any experience doing. So I wanted to learn those kind of operational things. And then turns out that like it's been 5 years. So um, I've been getting involved with basically every single aspect of the company except for bench work and the actual science and the manufacturing and the engineering. But everything else I take care of, and I've learned a ton. Yeah, in the course of that 5 years. So I hope that wasn't too long winded, but that's basically my story.
Yeah, and it's an amazing story, from the multicultural, I would say, background. Just all those countries are practically your countries and nationality, to moving from journalism, entrepreneurship, and now being, in the heart of a biotech. Uh, I will go back to multicultural and different countries. But let me first understand a little bit more your biotech. We discussed, I know about it, but I'm sure like many people would love to hear what you do, because your purpose is strong, right? You want to radically improve human health. So tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more about your biotech and what you guys do.
Sure. So, I guess every single biotech startup nowadays, whether they be medical device, diagnosis, or therapeutics, will all say, their really purpose is to elevate human health. So I think that's just a common thread, which is great. But for us, we want to be a very disruptive force, really changing the landscape of how tissue processing and phenotyping has been done for the past 100 years. And if you look at our human body, everyone is three-dimensional, right? However, all the life sciences tools out there that has been deciphering and trying to understand the biological system, they're all 1D. So these are extremely powerful tools, like DNA sequencing, which Illumina is leading the way. That's obviously one-dimensional or almost like no dimension. Because you're just sequencing. And then there are a lot of spatial biology companies nowadays, especially in like proteomics and transcriptomics. I'm sure you've heard of companies like 10x Genomics. So these are the kind of like the new hotshots that are coming up. And I think they're great, also very powerful and innovative tools. However, our challenge or the problem that we are trying to solve is that we want to really understand the human biology in 3D because it is 3D, right? So that's basically, what we are doing here at Life Canvas, and we have the tools and the technology to really make that happen. So that's our ultimate goal. And by being able to understand the human biological system, which is extremely complex in 3D, like you get to apply this to personalized medicine, diagnosis, right, and drug discovery. And it just gives you a much more accurate and overall a much more holistic picture. So you're not just looking at a building like the MIT Sloan building, but you get to see the entire, Boston or Massachusetts for that sake. And by having that connectivity and being able to understand, which neurons are connected to what, when like a certain like intervention happens, right? Then that's huge in terms of trying to really understand the bigger landscape. So that's our value proposition, and that's what we do. Yeah.
That's awesome. What about your leadership learning that you had along the way and now leading this company, right? Like from the interviews you've done, obviously you've done amazing interviews, to what you learned, right? Like from country to country, from journalism that you took with you into the entrepreneurship journey and now in biotech. What is the top 1 or 2 learning that you had?
Sure. So I think this one's a little tough, but I was trained first in Singapore, which is kind of a perfect marriage between the West and the East. So I worked for CNBC, which was back then owned by GE, so essentially an American company, but the operations was done by Singaporeans and expats. So it was truly like a global setting, and I really enjoyed that because they really put a lot of emphasis on efficiency. However, there was kind of like that, I guess, the more Western latitude as well. How Asian companies like to do things very fast, right? And then although there's a lot of bureaucracy, because this is like a top-down approach, when your boss says, make this happen in a week, no matter what, you have to get it done, right? So that's kind of the mentality. And the West is like they give you more flexibility and autonomy, but you have more responsibility, right? So when you combine those two together, I think it was, a very kind of a productive setting that also made it very rewarding for people to work in. The Korean culture and the television station, especially news, is a very traditional setting, kind of a discipline, and back then it was really managed by a lot of kind of male bosses with very strong personalities, and culture wise it was like a bulldozer culture, like you get it done no matter what. So I think I learned a lot of that kind of sense of execution, like no excuses. I will just get this done and make sure I also outperform, right? So that mentality and that grit was installed in me, I think, very deeply in the Korean work environment setting. However, what I did not like about that setting was that you rarely had a voice. So like all the directions or like the bigger picture and like the pathway came from your bosses or the organization itself. So you will get a promotion or you'll be recognized if you deliver, yeah, and then if you basically perform well as kind of like a cog in that wheel. Now I am running actually like a US company, and it's a startup. So our composition is relatively young. So relatively young, ambitious. Gen Zs, millennials, and the slightly older folks that wants to make a dent in the world in life sciences. So that's the phenotype of our current group, and they're mostly American too, right? But I was never raised as an American, so to be raised leading that organization is a tough one, right? But I think there's a universal language, which is basically you have your milestones and your collective goals, and everyone is aligned on that. Then I think that's when like your genuine passion and your genuine drive appears. And then after that, our motto is really flexibility. So we give people a lot of freedom and latitude. However, responsibility is a big one. And in the startup land, if you don't perform, then the company's gonna go down. So you really have to meet what you said you're gonna do. In oftentimes or most of the times, even like outperform and make sure that you do more than what you said. And then combining that concept with grit and execution that I've learned from Asia or the East, I think is kind of like the underlying force of Life Canvas. Yes.
Yeah, that's powerful, and it's my summary many times I would say love and discipline, right? Like caring about your people, making sure they have, their well-being, and you genuinely care for them while making sure that you're disciplined in how you execute on the different topics that you're on. And now that you're growing as a company, you talked about this strong execution, but you said a powerful sentence where you felt you were not really heard in your previous life. So now as a leader, the impact that you have on your startup is just massive. And I know that you're recruiting and growing with your operations. What is the one thing you're looking at people when you're hiring them? And what is the type of culture once they're in that you're trying to do, not for them to live what you lived from the sense of not being heard?
Well, I think there are mainly two things that we look at. One is the genuine drive. So, we want someone that is very committed because she or he or they believe in the mission of Life Canvas and is genuinely just a driven person, right? People that are self-starters. So that's one thing that we look at. And then the second thing we look at, and I'm not sure if you're going to like this answer, but intelligence as well. So, I think when drive and intelligence is combined together, it really becomes a powerful thing. And then the third thing, I don't think I even need to mention it, but, we don't want any assholes in our group. So we want nice people. So nice and kind people.
Well, once you have those people onboarded, what is the culture that you try to create? How do you include them? Anything you work. I know in startups it's kind of challenging sometimes in the beginning to keep the spirit and the genuine purpose that you have, as you said, this genuine drive that you have. How do you transmit this to the people you're recruiting?
Right. So, 5 years into a startup, like I think oftentimes people have this like misconception that you eat ramen noodles for a year, right? And then like you just like, put your head down and really like work hard on something, then you're gonna be the next Facebook or something like that, right? That's not the case for, I would say, 99.9% of the startups out there, right? So I think people get a little fatigued after a 3-year timeline, to be honest, because there was this great mission and we are making inroads and we have traction and we're growing. However, unlike a comfortable, like a big corporation setting, when you're the one that needs to constantly solve the problems and problems emerge from left and right, then obviously I think it's just kind of human nature to need to take a break once in a while, right? So you constantly need to replenish your folks with the inspiration and make sure that you are aligned on the goals, because oftentimes startups also need to pivot. Like your goals 3 years 3 years ago may not be the same goal today, right? So reassuring employees being aligned on the goal and understanding what it really means for the industry, I think is something that needs to be fueled constantly for the employees and the team members. I have seen this firsthand, like you feel like maybe they're a little discouraged. I think this can happen in any organization, and you try to give them a raise. or the proper recognition, or a promotion with a different title, I think that's very short-lived. Obviously, those incentives needs to take place. However, people that usually start join a startup are people that are looking for something else besides just a comfortable 9 to 5, a check that may be growing every year, right? So they're looking for a purpose and a mission, and I think you need to collectively discuss that and assure them and make them realize that we are making inroads and this is happening as we speak. So that constant communication is very important. Also, what we do at Life Canvas, we're a very small organization, so we have 16 people to date, right? And then we're trying to double by the end of this year. um, However, because it's still small enough, what we can do is that each person actually gets to decide their own milestones and achievements. So they decide their goals, and of course, as a team, we have to align that. Hey, this timeline is very well in sync with the company's overall goal. And if all of that story makes sense, then obviously the person gets to drive his own milestones and projects that
Yeah.
he or she came up with. And I think that's a very like motivating thing, because you're not just doing something that's been told, but you're actually designing your own career in some ways, and like also building the company's future. And you see the direct impact that you have, right, as a person. And I think this is very different from working for a 50,000 people company.
Yeah, yeah, and this is powerful. Like deciding, it's full accountability, as you said. Like this is something you look for, and actually you're doing. So that's really a great example, I think, to replicate. So as you shared, you have ups and downs, obviously, in the biotechs and startup world, right? And it might be even more challenging than big corporations, obviously, with ups and downs. So how do you manage this to keep the engagement? You shared a little bit about down motivation for your people. I imagine you had some tough moments. What are those stories or a story that you can tell us, and how you ramped up and went back into the strength that you are today, and how you're growing? Doubling your hires and your people by year end is a strong growth that the company is seeing. So that's really great. Congrats on that. So how did you live this tough moments that we hear some startups live, and then to ramp up again?
Yeah, so we've had our ups and downs. Luckily, we've been able to continue our growth trajectory. Meaning, so we have an 85% compound annual growth rate, which is pretty
Oh,
healthy, right? So
yeah,
we're growing, and because we're growing steadily, I think our team members see that, oh, we're actually making traction, and we have more users every day, so we are starting to build like a live canvas community, right? So that's great. um, However, I think there are times when everyone is a little overwhelmed with the workload, all right? And then because we are bringing a novel technology to the market, oftentimes we end up taking on a lot of projects for free, right?
yeah,
And because we are aggressively doing that, I think there's just a lot on everyone's plate, right? However, as a manager, I also feel like I want to balance the current staff versus the future hiring, so that it's not like we do an overkill or we hire too
yeah,
soon, where like we feel like that wasn't necessary. So that's kind of my dilemma. And I think a lot of times when you talk to external people that are assessing your company, so to speak, so let's say investors, right?
yeah,
When you try to bring on like a disruptive technology, they will always say that there's gonna be inertia, right? Which means like the medical space or the healthcare space has been doing 3D tissue processing in 2D for 100 years. How are you gonna change the system? And what makes you so confident that you can overturn that? Right.
yeah,
So I think as a founder, you actually meet those moments a lot, and they are very discouraging. And that's why I think grit and never really losing hope is very important. So, when we have this roadblock, and there were times when it was very hard for us to actually fundraise just because of this issue, right? Disruptive technology, as sexy as they sound, there are actually a lot of risk averse investors out there, and they are going to say, what makes you so confident that you can change, what's been done for the past century? And I think our job as founders is to always ignite that passion in our employees that we can do it, right?
Mm.
And because we are actually seeing it with our products, like users are coming back with great comments, I think they also firsthand see the impact and the change and how this could develop further. But it's very important to be actually quite visionary in installing that vision every quarter or so to motivate employees. I think it's like a very systematic toolkit, but it actually works because they want to be part of that difference. Yes.
And with this, I would love to go to a different section where I will be saying one word and give me what comes top of mind. Sounds good?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So the first word is entrepreneurship.
Ooh, entrepreneurship. So I think a lot of people had very rosy descriptions, right, for entrepreneurship, like innovation, disruption, and all these very sexy, like Elon Musk type of things. Um, I think entrepreneurship is a journey of blazing a trail. So, it's really making an impact in changing the world, so to speak. That sounds so like grandiose, but it really is because you're actually introducing something that's never existed before. But the pathway of actually delivering that is, it can be very lonely and scary. But you're still blazing a trail that's going to make a difference. So, yeah, I think I would sum up entrepreneurship as that. I hope that had a nice balance of both hope and the reality, which can be a bit gruesome sometimes.
Yeah. A lonely journey of making an impact. That's powerful and balanced for sure. You said disruption before, so I'd love you to react on this word.
Yeah, disruption is, I think, transforming how people do something, right, for the better. So in our case, if you could only see the human biological system in 2D before, by having 3D, it opens a new door to new things. So I think disruption is just opening that gateway to new possibilities. Yeah.
And what about inclusion?
Inclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is the one that I actually feel quite big about because I'm an expat myself, and because of that, our little startup actually we bring in a lot of foreigners in our work crew, and for me, like this is their second home, and they are trying to realize their dreams in a foreign land, right? And because of that, I think I feel a little attached to because I've been there and I'm honestly still, in that pathway. And I honestly believe that, every different perspective actually makes us richer. And therefore, even if you do need to sponsor a visa, we're actually very big on getting the foreigners. Also, not just overseas and US folks, but in terms of gender, in terms of discipline, because we have everything from like a computer scientist to a neuroscientist and an engineer, and someone like myself, an operational person. Diversity is the one thing that we are very big on, and obviously we want everyone to feel equitable and to feel like they have the same say in our organization.
Great. The last one would be spread love in organizations.
For me, love is really, I think, the same as opportunity in some ways. Like for me, I feel like I want every single one of our team members to have the same opportunity, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to learn, and to opportunity to realize that the sky is the limit and they can really be that infinite person that they desire to be. So the same opportunity to everyone is my way of spreading love in our organization.
Thank you, Rhie. What final word of wisdom would you have for leaders and people who are, building biotechs and building startups that literally have this same, mission or purpose of changing the world? Any final word of wisdom for those?
So I think life sciences and biotech, unlike some of the other areas, is much longer term kind of a project, right? It's a marathon rather than a sprint. So I think really understanding that your mission can have a very big impact on human life. It's not just an entertaining new app or something that makes you shop better with better discounts, right? The algorithms and the tools that you're working on is really going to have a direct impact on your family, your friends, and yourself and the humankind. So I don't know how else to put this, but I want everyone to really believe in their mission and the impact of it, because it's going to be a hard journey. And in order to really make that happen, I think you gotta believe the impact that it's going to have longer term, and it can stay there for 100 years, 20 years, right? So believe in your mission, and even if it gets tough, I think just go back to your core and understand that it can happen because there's a clear reason that it needs to. Yeah.
Yeah, and what, as you said, biotech, pharma, life science, right? Like we're working hard to make life better for patients around us and literally change the paradigm of care, which is a very noble purpose. Thank you so much, Rhie, for such a genuine discussion that you had today, and thanks for all that you're doing with Live Canvas, trying to change also another paradigm that has been here for years and years. You're reimagining the future with what your technology is bringing to the world. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much, Naji, for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you all for tuning in. Connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com and subscribe to your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of our weekly episodes. Stay in touch and please share with us your thoughts and reviews, and most importantly, spread love in your organizations.